What is going on, guys? It's Sloppy Saturdays, getting into another episode of a new look college football program in 2025. And in this episode, we are going over the Oregon Ducks. Now, if you look at the Oregon Ducks last year, we're talking about one of the most disappointing seasons in college football, if not the most disappointing. We thought this team was going to sky to the college football championship, and they just did not. We're talking about a team that was number one in the country for almost the whole entire season, beat their rival Ohio State in their regular season. They match up against them in the playoffs and they get their doors blown off. Game was not even a game 5 minutes in. Now we see how this Oregon team turns in 2025. Last year they had a ton of veteran talent and experience. They absolutely killed the transfer portal and their returnees. I mean, we're talking about Dylan Gabriel, arguably the best quarterback in the entire country last year. Tez Johnson, who nobody thought was going to return. Derek Harmon, Kobe Savage, Jabbar Muhammad, Connolly, and Cornelius, two top 10 offensive linemen in the NFL draft. They just had a ton of veteran talent. Even a guy like Terrence Ferguson, Patrick Herbert, all these guys are gone now. What are they going to do? We're going to show you guys how they turned and pivoted for the 2025 season. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I don't have as much hope for them as I did last year. Last year, I thought they were the best team in the country, though. Now, this year, I think they definitely do have the capabilities to make a deep college football run. They just have a lot of X factors and some guys, like they have the talent that's there, but they just don't have the guys with as much experience as last year, which is why I'm a little lower on them. But I'm ready to get right into it. Tell you guys how they patched their holes from last year, their talent coming in, and what we expect for them. So let's get right into it. Now on the defense, like we said, the defense lost a lot. We're talking about Derek Harmon, Kobe Savage, Jabbar Muhammad, but they have two anchors in this defense that stayed. We're talking about Mateo Ugalele, that was one of the best defensive players last year and an anchor for them last year. He's got to take a step up and be their captain. He's a stud defensive end, gets to the quarterback really well, puts a lot of pressure on the opposing offenses. And we got Devin Jackson, who really developed last year into a true number one linebacker. And he's one of the fastest linebackers in the country. He's got to take a step up and be an actual anchor for this defense as well. These two guys have to lead this unit. Now we're talking about Dylan Dieterman and Ed from Purdue to replace Kobe Savage. I absolutely love this move. Dylan Dieterman was fourth in the Big Ten in tackles last year. He was an absolute star at Purdue, and he was one of the best players in the transfer portal at the secondary. And he comes in, replacing Kobe Savage. I absolutely love it. And the secondary isn't really a unit I'm that worried in for Dan Lanning. I mean, Dan Lanning has developed secondary players so well. We're talking about Christian Gonzalez, Muhammad, and others. Again, he got absolutely torched in the Ohio State game. But again, you're talking about one of the best receiving corps, maybe even of all time on that Ohio State team. You're talking about three number one receivers. I don't know how to handle them the first game. And again, you're not handling that receiving corps twice. But Dylan Dieterman, I really like stepping in for Kobe Savage. Then we get into Darren Johnson out of Northwestern, who was second Big Ten, and he replaces Muhammad. I absolutely love this move as well. Again, you're taking really two guys with Dieterman and Darren Johnson, two guys that came from a little bit smaller programs that want to get more notice, but were absolute stars in the Big Ten. And they've played these Big Ten teams before, which I absolutely love. You're taking two guys in conference. I think this definitely patches up the secondary. Now we get into Bear Alexander, who's replacing Derek Harmon. Bear Alexander is kind of a weird situation. You're talking about a guy that went to Georgia, that went to USC, but never really made a name for himself outside of his, hype coming in out of high school. This was a guy that really sat out most of the time at USC last year due to just playing time dispute. But again, this guy is going into a big year for him as he's preparing for the NFL draft. So he does have a lot to play for. We have the line open up for him because, again, Derek Harmon and others on his defense did leave. So I think Barry Alexander is really going to be a guy that's going to be playing for a lot. And I love this move for them there. So we're looking at Dylan Dieterman, Darren Johnson, Barry Alexander. Then you have, obviously, Devon Jackson, Mateo Ugalele. This pairs up to be a nice defense. They did patch some holes, like we said, with the secondary. Barry Alexander is an X factor, a question mark. But again, he has a lot of potential. This defense still should be solid from last year. Now getting into the offense is really what everybody questions. Now, it's basically a whole new look offense. The biggest thing for this Oregon team is they brought back Evan Stewart. Evan Stewart, very similar to Tez Johnson the year before. Very surprised he came back. But again, he has a chance to be the true wide receiver one of this offense. You're talking about last year, again, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, split in time being the number one receiver. Again, Tez Johnson had his games, Evan Stewart had his games, and you could argue Tez Johnson was the number one receiver basically the whole entire year for Oregon. But Evan Stewart still had a very great season, and everybody knows the potential a guy like Evan Stewart has. So he stays as the constant in this offense, and I think he's going to be a top 3 to top 5 college football receiver this year. Now the problem is they also lost like I said, Tez Johnson, and they also lost Trayshawn Holden. So they lost 2 receivers. How are they going to make up for this? This is a huge question mark for this team, but they bring in number 1 receiver in the class, the Carrion Moore. Now, I don't want everybody to sit here and be like the Carrion Moore after what we saw from Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, that he's going to be that guy, that he's going to be a complete number 1 receiver, one of the best players in college football. I don't want people to think that because those are just unrealistic expectations. Can it happen? Sure. But if the Carrion Moore provides the ability to be a second receiver in this Oregon offense, really takes down that slot role, I think that would be huge for this team because you have already a true number 1 receiver in Evan Stewart. Bringing in the Carrion Moore, again, he could have a smaller role because you already have a number 1 receiver. And then they also had Trey Benson as well. Trey Benson, another guy like Barry Alexander, a guy that played in 2 pretty huge programs, Florida State and Alabama, but a huge question mark. I do like the move, though. He's a little bit more of a big physical receiver, very different from Evan Stewart and the Carrion Moore. So I like that after them as well. That should make up the 3 receivers in this receiving core. Again, we'll see how it pans out. We'll see if any other like underclassmen could really step up and take the hold of this offense. But that's the receiving core again. Not as good as last year, but definitely has the talent to be. The Carrion Moore, number 1 receiver in the class. Evan Stewart expected to have a huge jump. The offensive line was something I was very worried about for this Oregon team, but they patched this up great. We're talking about Colin and Cornelius Levin, like I said, 2 top 10 offensive linemen in the NFL draft class, but they get a lot of help on this offensive line. You get Alex Harkey out of Texas State. Now, this is a guy that's going to slide in as a day 1 starter for Oregon. We're talking about a guy with a ton of experience. He could definitely slide in. And then you get the top tackle in the transfer portal out of Nevada, Isaiah World. And you get the top interior offensive lineman late in the transfer portal in Emmanuel Pregnant. This offensive line is going to be so talented. I think it's going to be maybe as talented as last year because you pick up the best tackle, the best interior lineman in the class, and you pick up another starter. So I absolutely love it. I think this offensive line has a ton of talent. And like we just mentioned with the receiving core, again, a lot of talent still. It's just the veteran experience isn't there. Then when you look at running back, you could argue the best move out of this whole entire Oregon offseason. They get Malachi Hughes. Malachi Hughes out of Tulane, he had over 1,500 total yards and 17 touchdowns. He's a veteran with experience, something this offense does not have outside of Evan Stewart. So he's another constant option and was one of the best running backs last year. And he also pairs with Noah Whittington, a guy that's been on his Oregon team for 2+ years and was a change of pace back last year for Jordan James. I think this running back room is going to absolutely explode under this offensive line. And I think this is the most unit on his team with the most college football experience. Now you get into the quarterback, Dante Moore. This is what everybody wants to hear about. My thoughts on Dante Moore. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. When Dante Moore went to UCLA, I thought it was the perfect fit for him. He comes in a year after Dorian Thompson-Robinson leaves, and he's a very similar dual-threat quarterback to Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And it was an absolute dumpster fire for him that year. The one thing Oregon fans do have to think about when he left UCLA as well with that dumpster fire, UCLA didn't get any better. They are one of the worst power conference teams, and they were one of the worst power conference teams this year. So maybe he was just on UCLA. He comes in. I think he had the perfect setup. He sits behind Dillon Gabriel for a year, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in college football ever. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's top of the charts in all college football, passing yards, passing touchdowns. He's at the top. He sits behind and learns, and he goes to a big program now. And now he really has the opportunity to take the Bulls by the horn and absolutely explode for this Oregon team. Now, with Dante Moore, I really expect it to be very boomer bust for him. Like I said, he was a starter at UCLA, and he was not great at all. But I think he could have possibly really developed, and I think he is a dual threat quarterback. I mean, we're talking about a 5-star kind of guy in Dante Moore. Again, I think the setup was perfect for him to succeed. And I think this running back room is going to succeed under Dante Moore a lot better because you're talking about a guy that really brings a true threat in the RPO game. Dylan Gabriel, a guy that definitely could have run, but again, didn't look to do it. Dante Moore, a true dual threat with a great offensive line and two big running backs. I think that this offense really sky is the limit. And then you talk about the two receivers, like we said, Evan Stewart. You talk about carry more. This offense has a lot of potential. Now, the one thing I do like about Dante Moore as well, when you look at the contenders in the Big Ten, outside of Penn State, who has a lot of veteran experience, the other teams really don't. You look at Ohio State, Julian Sain. You look at Michigan, Bryce Underwood. They have first-time starters, guys who never started a college football game. At least with Dante Moore, he does have the experience starting in a college football game. And you guys may laugh at that, like UCLA, he wasn't that good. But having starting experience is so key because we look at guys like Dylan Raiola, DJ Lagway, a bunch of guys from last year who were top touted freshmen. And again, they didn't really exceed as we thought they would because again, it might have just been because of that experience. But Dante Moore has a little more experience in this Big Ten than a lot of people do. So I really like Dante Moore coming in, and I think this is going to be a very new look offense for Oregon. But again, with the receivers, they have the talent. With the running backs, they have the talent. This offensive line is set. I didn't talk about the tight ends, but I think Kenyon Sadiq, a guy that's been sitting in Oregon for a couple of years now, behind Terrence Ferguson, behind Patrick Herbert, I think he could be a mismatch. He's a physical freak. And you bring in Jamari Johnson as well out of Louisville, who had a very productive season. So they have two tight ends they can rely on. Again, it's really going to be a lot of X factors for this Oregon team. Can a guy like Bear Alexander step up? Can a guy like the Carrier Moore be a true option right away as a freshman? So there is a lot of question marks again, and the biggest question mark of them all: can Dante Moore really be a star quarterback in college football? That wraps up this episode. I expect Oregon to really contend in this Big Ten. Maybe they could possibly win it again. I have Penn State as the favorites, and I expect them to be a college football playoff team. This Oregon team, maybe they can make a deep run. Again, we got to see how this team pans out because there's a lot of X factors, and again, a whole lot of talent, but a lot of young talent. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays, and we are out.